In this presentation, I will be talking about research we did to understand what parents experience when going through a Wiedemann-Steiner diagnosis for their child. We based our analysis on previous research that explored parents' experiences of their child receiving a diagnosis of autism, as we felt that this would be a good starting point for understanding parents' experiences of their child receiving a diagnosis of Wiedemann-Steiner syndrome. The interview data was split into three parts: parents' experiences before diagnosis, during diagnosis, and after diagnosis. So starting with parents' experiences before a Wiedemann-Steiner diagnosis, we found four main themes: recognising differences, respecting parents, seeking answers, and delays. Recognising differences captured parents noticing behavioural and physical differences in their child, often from the moment they were born or as an infant. Over half mentioned behavioural differences, including things like feeding or sleep issues, unusual crying or breathing, and many of them noticed this from birth. When it came to physical differences, almost 2/3 mentioned noticing something, including being small, distinct facial features, or weak muscles, and most of them noticed this from birth. Respecting parents captured parents' descriptions of not being taken seriously or believed by clinicians, and inappropriate comments. Just under half mentioned that they were not taken seriously, and about 1/3 went as far as suggesting that they felt blamed for their child's issues or gaslit for expressing their concerns. 3 parents even mentioned insensitive comments that they remembered years later. It is also worth noting that some parents also spoke positively about their interactions with clinicians. Seeking answers captured parents' descriptions of urgently seeking a diagnosis. Just under half described actively doing this. One mentioned that a clinician asked her why she wanted a diagnosis, but in our interviews, parents were very clear. Over 1/3 wanted one because of medical uncertainty, 1 in 5 because they feared the future, and 2 for support. Delays captured parents' descriptions of the long wait for a diagnosis. Just under 1/3 described arduous and isolated journeys and or emotional difficulty. 1 in 5 described lack of certainty, while 3 described how their resilience dwindled. When it came to parents' experiences during the diagnosis process, we found 5 themes: delays, communication, assessment, relief and vindication, and shock and grief. Delays captured parents' descriptions of an indefinite wait for results. Over half described delays at this stage, and almost all of these were linked to genome research projects. Some also talked about the impacts of delays on stress and things like family planning. Communication captured parents' descriptions of the ways that they were told about the diagnosis. Almost 2/3 described issues with this. About 1/3 described vague, dismissive, or confusing communication. 4 that had been participants said that the news was delivered to them unexpectedly in a letter that used technical language about genetic aspects, but no further information or support, so they were left to make an appointment with their clinician for an explanation, and this usually meant more delay or anxiety. 3 described expecting a routine appointment, so they were unprepared for the diagnosis, and this was particularly difficult if they had gone to the appointment alone. Assessment captured parents' descriptions of the diagnosis appointment, where they either received the diagnosis itself or information about the diagnosis that they had received in some other form. About 1/3 expressed being shocked or confused or left with unanswered questions, while just under 1/3 described only being given basic information. I am glad to say, however, that a few parents described their assessment as a great experience. Relief and vindication captured parents' descriptions of positive emotions during the appointment. Almost 2/3 expressed relief, some of whom even felt vindicated that their concerns, which had not been believed or taken seriously before, were justified. Shock and grief captured parents' descriptions of negative emotions during the assessment. Some described the diagnosis as the beginning of grief or emotionally overwhelming, and one called it bittersweet, capturing the idea that emotional responses were sometimes complex. When we examined parents' experiences after the diagnosis, we found 5 themes: sharing information, understanding, support, family, and community. Sharing information captured parents' descriptions of how little clinicians knew, as they had seldom heard of Wiedemann-Steiner syndrome. Over a third said they got their information from other Wiedemann-Steiner parents, while about a quarter said that they knew more than the clinicians did. Understanding captured parents' descriptions of how they incorporated Wiedemann-Steiner into their child's identity, which was described by over a third of parents. For some parents, this process took a long time. Support captured parents' descriptions of their different support experiences. Just under half described actively seeking support and or valued support that they had received, while over a third described lack of support, often from schools, and or support that they desired, so things like respite care or funding. Family captured parents' descriptions of family members' reactions to the diagnosis. Just under a third described valued support, just under a third that their family didn't get it or accept it, and just under a third said that their family members were shocked or saddened by their diagnosis, while a few said that their family did get it after the diagnosis. Community captured parents' descriptions of the valued Wiedemann-Steiner community groups. Parents repeatedly brought up this wonderful Wiedemann-Steiner Syndrome Foundation, treasured Facebook groups, dedicated parent advocates, and the ongoing support of Dr. Wendy Jones, with enormous gratitude and warmth, which was a wonderful thing to hear. After receiving a Wiedemann-Steiner diagnosis, parents described how information flows between Wiedemann-Steiner families and onto clinicians and teachers, indicating that parents themselves are generating the growing knowledge about Wiedemann-Steiner syndrome. Most notably, one parent had created a list of follow-up tests for parents of newly diagnosed Wiedemann-Steiner children, which was valued by several of the parents we interviewed. The most heartwarming thing about parents' descriptions was how important the Wiedemann-Steiner community was. From this research, we have compiled a list of 10 considerations for clinicians when communicating with parents before, during, and after a Wiedemann-Steiner syndrome diagnosis, and you should have these in your conference pack. However, all but one parent had unanswered questions about Wiedemann-Steiner syndrome, so we counted them and found that there were 113 questions in total. These are questions for which clinicians and researchers should try to seek answers and find ways to communicate them to parents in simple and practical terms. I want to say a huge thank you to our parent participants who made this research possible. We believe that your voices as parents of children with Wiedemann-Steiner syndrome can be powerful forces for understanding the psychological impact of a Wiedemann-Steiner diagnosis and help to forge better diagnosis processes for parents of the future. So I just wanted to end with one story that I heard last week. A parent that I know who has a child with Wiedemann-Steiner let me know that she had been contacted with a newly diagnosed family. And this family had found her within 30 minutes of their diagnosis. So it shows that things are changing and improving for families. Thank you so much.